Chapter 1. They called me the Frost-Blight, a chilling whisper that followed me like my own shadow. My own pack, the Timberfang, had exiled me to the frost-bitten edges of our territory almost 2 decades ago, the day I was born. Not because I was weak, but because I was cold. Literally. My skin never warmed, my breath misted even on the hottest days, and my wolf form, well, no one had dared touch my fur after the first healer tried. They said my touch leached the warmth from the air, from the land, from life itself. A shadow shifter, a rare, cursed aberration in a world where warmth and connection were everything. I'd accepted my fate, resigned to my solitude. My small, ice-kissed cabin was a monument to my exclusion, built far from the pack's bustling village. I hunted alone, moved alone, and watched the shimmering northern lights alone, a constant, beautiful reminder of the cold that was my only companion. My sister Elara sometimes snuck out to leave me supplies, her eyes always full of pity that I pretended not to see. Pity was a colder touch than the frost. But today, pity was the least of my concerns. A tremor of unease, colder than my own skin, had been prickling at me for days. The Alpha Council had decreed it. The revered Sunstone Alpha, Kael of the Sunstone Pack, was coming. He was here to choose his Luna from among the eligible she-wolves of all the northern packs, and for some unfathomable, infuriating reason, I was expected to attend. Alpha Kael. The name alone conjured images of searing heat, of molten gold and volcanic strength. His pack's territory bordered an active geothermal zone, their wolves rumored to practically glow with inner fire. He was everything I wasn't, everything I could never have. He radiated life, warmth, and the kind of power that would instantly shrivel my desolate existence into nothing. My escape plan had been perfected over years. A hidden tunnel, a few days' provisions, and a deep knowledge of the wilderness that would allow me to disappear until the farce was over. Yet, an inexplicable pull, an icy tendril of curiosity, coiled in my gut, drawing me like a moth to a flame I knew would burn me. "Elara!" Lyra's voice, hushed and urgent, cut through the quiet hum of the forest. She pushed through the curtain of snow-laden pines, her breath clouding. "You have to come." "Father sent me. He said the Sunstone delegation is already at the Great Hall. Alpha Kael himself asked for all eligible she-wolves to be present." Her eyes darted around my small, Spartan cabin, lingering on the frost patterns on my window panes. "He asked for all, not for the frost-bitten exile," I retorted, my voice flat, devoid of the warmth hers always carried. I pushed a stray silver-white lock of hair from my face. "I'll only be a distraction, a morbid curiosity." "No!" Lyra insisted, stepping closer, her warmth a faint discomfort to my senses. "He's different, Elara. There's a presence about him, and there are whispers, stories that his quest for a Luna isn't just about strength, but about something else, something ancient. You never know." She looked at me with that same hopeful pity, as if my mere presence might somehow unlock a miracle. A miracle? For the Frost-Blight? The idea was laughable, but her words, something ancient, echoed in a strange, resonant chamber within me. My unique curse had always felt larger than just a personal misfortune. There was no recorded shadow shifter in generations. Why me? "Fine," I sighed, pulling on my thickest furs-lined cloak, its material already chilling beneath my touch. "But don't expect a fairy tale, Lyra. Expect frostbite and awkward silence." As we walked towards the Great Hall, the warmth of the Timberfang village pressed in. Laughter, the smell of wood smoke and roasting meat, the vibrant energy of living, breathing wolves. I pulled my hood deeper, trying to make myself smaller, invisible. I could feel the stares, the hesitant glances. The Frost-Blight, the cursed one. The Great Hall buzzed with a nervous excitement. She-wolves, preening and perfumed, vied for attention. But all eyes, all energy, were drawn to the raised dais where the alphas sat. And there at the center was him, Alpha Kael. He was even more imposing than the legends. Tall, broad-shouldered, with hair like spun obsidian, and eyes the color of a raging inferno. Not red, but a deep burning amber that seemed to pierce the very air. A tribal tattoo, intricate and swirling like embers, climbed his left arm, disappearing beneath the rich, crimson furs of his alpha cloak. He exuded power, not just physical might, but an ancient, grounded authority that made the other alphas seem like flickering candles next to a bonfire. My breath hitched. My heart, which I'd always thought immune to such things, gave a peculiar icy lurch. He was looking at the assembled she-wolves, his gaze sweeping over them, assessing. Then for a split second those burning eyes landed on me, and the world shifted. It wasn't just his heat I felt, but something else. Something primal and raw. A cold so profound it burned, a heat so intense it froze. A sudden violent surge of energy ripped through my core, making the air around me crackle. The frost on the windows closest to me spiderwebbed, then fractured. The ground beneath my feet trembled. I gasped. A silent, desperate sound, as a terrifying power I never knew I possessed, roared to life within me, threatening to consume everything. This wasn't warmth. This was an awakening. And I knew, with a horrifying certainty, that the greatest warmth wasn't what I'd been denied, but what I was destined to unleash. And Alpha Kael, my fated mate, had just sparked the first, terrifying echo of its awakening. Chapter 2. The crackling energy vanished as quickly as it had come, leaving behind a silence so profound it was a physical weight. Every eye in the great hall was locked on me, not with curiosity, but with a renewed, sharpened terror. The whispers started, venomous and immediate. Dark magic. An omen. The Frost-Blight will be the end of us all. My own pack members, including my father, Alpha Boren, wouldn't meet my gaze. Shame and fear radiated from them, a familiar wave that threatened to drown me. Lyra stood frozen, her face pale with worry. But Kael? Alpha Kael didn't flinch. His burning amber eyes remained fixed on me, narrowed now, not with fear, but with a look of intense, analytical concentration. It was as if he hadn't just witnessed a freakish display of cursed power, but had felt a missing piece of a puzzle slam into place. He felt it too. I knew he did. A she-wolf, stunningly beautiful with hair the color of molten copper and the proud bearing of a warrior, stepped forward from the line of suitors. Seraphina, daughter of the Silver Creek Alpha, a wolf widely considered to be the most likely choice for Luna. Alpha Kael, she said, her voice smooth but laced with steel, a clear sign from the ancestors. This creature is a danger. Her presence here is an insult to the sanctity of the Luna ceremony. Kael's gaze didn't leave mine. I will be the judge of that, Lady Seraphina, he replied, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards, silencing her instantly. He ignored the collective gasp from the room and began to walk. The formal greetings, the part of the ceremony where he was to meet each eligible she-wolf, had begun. He moved with a predator's grace, offering brief, polite nods to the hopefuls, his words clipped and formal. But it was a sham. Everyone in the hall knew he wasn't looking at them. He was making his way toward me. With every step he took, the heat rolling off him intensified. It was like a physical force, pressing against the bubble of cold that was my existence. The other wolves instinctively parted, creating a path between us. My heart hammered an icy, frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Run!" my instinct screamed. "Disappear before he gets here." But I was rooted to the spot, trapped by the intensity of his stare. He stopped directly in front of me. The air between us was a war zone of opposing forces. a space where fire and ice clashed in a silent, violent struggle. Up close, the raw power he possessed was staggering. I had to tilt my head back to meet his gaze. "You are Elara," he stated. It wasn't a question. I managed a single sharp nod, my throat too tight for words. "What was that?" he asked, his voice low, meant only for me. I don't know what you mean," I whispered, the lie tasting like ash. My wolf, a creature I barely felt, cowered deep inside me. A flicker of something. Disappointment? Impatience? Crossed his face. "Do not lie to me." I felt it. A power that answered mine. He took a half step closer, the heat becoming almost unbearable. "I've been searching for an echo, a sign. And I find it in a wolf who chills the very air she breathes. Explain it." "I can't," I choked out, my hands clenching into fists inside my cloak. "It's a curse." "Curses are just power without a name," he countered, his gaze unwavering. "Let me see." Before I could react, he reached out. My every instinct screamed. I recoiled, pulling back so sharply I stumbled. "Don't touch me." The words were a desperate plea, not a command. It wasn't him I was afraid for. It was for the agonizing burn I knew his touch would bring. Worse, I was afraid of what my touch would do to him. Could I truly drain the life from the Sunstone Alpha? He ignored my plea. His hand, large and calloused, shot out and closed around my wrist. A silent explosion. Searing, agonizing heat flooded my veins, a pain so blinding I cried out. It was the first true warmth I had ever felt, and it was excruciating, like being plunged into a volcano. My vision fractured into a kaleidoscope of fire and light. For him, I saw a flicker of shock in his amber eyes, as an abyss of absolute cold slammed into him from my touch. His inner fire wasn't extinguished, but it was challenged, met by a void so complete it seemed to swallow light. And in that moment of contact, we both saw it. Flashes of a shared vision, a sunstone glowing on a desolate peak, a creeping shadow that consumed the stars. Two wolves, one of fire and one of ice, locked not in battle but in a desperate, fated dance to hold back an encroaching darkness. Echoes of a prophecy neither of us knew. He ripped his hand back as if burned, and I staggered away, clutching my wrist. We were both breathing heavily, the entire hall staring at us in stunned silence. On the back of my pale hand, a faint, swirling mark like a black ember was seared into my skin. I glanced at his hand and saw its inverse, a glowing, frost-like pattern that stood out starkly against his tanned skin. We were marked. Linked. Kael stared at his hand, then back at me, a storm of emotions crossing his face, shock, disbelief, and a dawning, terrifying certainty. He straightened to his full height, his alpha presence flaring, commanding the absolute attention of every wolf in the room. His voice, when he spoke, was not that of a suitor, but of a commander issuing a decree that would change everything. "The ceremony is concluded for now," he announced, his voice ringing with indisputable authority. He pointed a single marked finger at me. "This one, Elara of the Timberfang, will return with me to the Sunstone territory at dawn. She will be under my personal watch until the nature of this power is understood." He paused, his fiery gaze sweeping over the silent crowd, daring anyone to challenge him. "She is either the greatest threat our packs have seen in generations, or she is our only salvation." Chapter 3. Chaos erupted the moment Kael's decree settled over the hall. My father, Alpha Boren, lunged forward, his face a mask of fury and desperation. "You cannot do this. She is a Timberfang wolf. She is my—" He cut himself off, unable to say the word daughter in front of his own pack. Kael didn't even turn his full body. He simply canted his head, and the sheer force of his alpha presence slammed into my father, stopping him dead in his tracks. She is a potential threat to every pack, Boren. And you have kept her hidden, a festering secret on the edge of your territory. My authority on this matter is absolute. My decision is final." His words were like stone, unmovable and cold, despite the heat that still radiated from him. My father shrank back, defeated not by a blow but by the weight of his own shame and Kael's undeniable power. He had just willingly surrendered his cursed daughter to a foreign alpha without a fight. The last fragile thread connecting me to my pack snapped. I was truly alone. Seraphina watched from the side, her arms crossed, a smug, triumphant smirk on her face. "A wise decision, Alpha Kael," she purred. "Some creatures are best kept on a very short leash." I was ushered out of the hall like a prisoner, my own pack guards flanking me, their faces grim. They took me back to my cabin for the last time, giving me mere minutes to gather my meager belongings. Lyra was waiting inside, her eyes red-rimmed. "Don't go," she whispered, grabbing my hand, ignoring the chill. "This is a death sentence. The Sunstone Wolves, they are not forgiving. They will see you as a monster." "They already see me as a monster here," I said, my voice hollow. I looked at the swirling black ember mark on my hand. It didn't hurt anymore, but it thrummed, a low, constant vibration that seemed to echo the beat of a distant drum. "I don't think I have a choice." "Be careful, Elara," she pleaded, pressing a small, leather-bound journal into my hands. "Power like that. It has a price. Don't let him be the one to decide what it is." At dawn, 2 of Kael's Sunstone warriors were waiting. They were immense, their skin tanned, and their eyes holding the same fiery intensity as their alpha. They didn't speak to me, only gestured toward a sturdy horse. Kael was already mounted on a massive black stallion that seemed carved from obsidian. The journey was a long, suffocating silence. We rode hard, the landscape shifting from the familiar snow-dusted pines of my home to the rugged, steamy landscape of the Sunstone territory. The snow thinned, then vanished completely, replaced by dark, volcanic rock and earth that steamed in the frigid air. For me, the increasing warmth was a physical oppression, a heavy blanket that made my lungs ache and my skin prickle with an unfamiliar, painful heat. I watched Kael, the way he rode with an easy, commanding grace. He never looked back, but I felt his awareness on me constantly, a palpable pressure at the back of my neck. My hand, where he'd marked me, throbbed in time with the hoofbeats. Halfway through the second day, he finally broke the silence. He reined in his horse, forcing the rest of us to a halt. Without a word, he dismounted and strode toward me. My horse shied away, sensing the tension. "Your hand," he commanded. Hesitantly, I held it out. He took it in his grip firm. This time, there was no blinding explosion, but the connection was instantaneous. A deep, resonant hum vibrated between us, fire and ice in a tense, unwilling harmony. The world around us seemed to fade. "What did you see?" he asked, his amber eyes boring into mine. "In the vision. Tell me everything." "I saw a mountain," I said, my voice raspy. "A glowing stone and a shadow, a living shadow that was swallowing the light." I looked at him, my fear warring with a need to understand. "And I saw us, 2 wolves, fighting it." His jaw clenched. "The Sunstone beacon," he murmured, more to himself than to me. He released my hand, but the thrumming sensation lingered. "The legends are true, then." He turned away, his shoulders heavy with a burden I couldn't comprehend. When we finally arrived at the Sunstone settlement, it was like stepping into another world. The village was built into the side of a mountain, carved from the same dark volcanic rock. Geothermal vents hissed steam into the air, and rivers of naturally hot water flowed through channels in the stone streets. For his people, it was a source of life and power. For me, it was a furnace. Every sunstone wolf we passed stopped and stared, their fiery eyes filled with suspicion and hostility. I was an intruder, a creature of ice in their kingdom of fire. Kael led me past the living quarters, past the great hall, and deeper into the mountain itself. We entered a vast cavern, the air thick with the smell of hot metal and something else, something ancient and elemental. In the center of the cavern, a massive, uncut crystal pulsed with a soft, golden light. The Sunstone Beacon. It was the source of all this warmth, all this power. But Kael didn't lead me to the stone. He led me to a chamber carved into the far wall, its entrance sealed by a heavy iron-wrought gate. It wasn't a guest room. It was a cell. "The beacon will amplify your power," he said, his voice echoing in the vast space. He unlocked the gate and gestured for me to enter. "But its energy will also contain it. You will remain here until I know exactly what you are." I stepped inside, the gate clanging shut behind me with a sound of finality. I was a prisoner once again, but this time, in a cage of heat and light that felt infinitely more dangerous than the cold solitude I had always known. "What are you going to do with me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He turned, his amber eyes glowing in the dim light of the beacon, his expression unreadable and grim. We begin at first light. Chapter 4, Sleep was impossible. The oppressive heat of the cavern, amplified by the constant golden pulse of the Sunstone Beacon, was a torment. It was like being slowly cooked alive. My own inner cold fought back, a desperate, losing battle that left my muscles aching and my mind frayed. I was a creature of winter trapped in the heart of an eternal summer. True to his word, Kael appeared at the first hint of light. The iron gate screeched open, the sound grating on my raw nerves. He stood there, framed by the cavern's golden glow, a formidable silhouette of power and authority. He carried no food, no water, only an unyielding resolve in his fiery eyes. "Show me," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Summon the power you displayed in the great hall. I need to see it, to understand its limits." I shrank back against the hot stone wall of my cell. "I can't," I whispered, and it was the truth. "I don't control it. It just happened." "Then make it happen," he growled, stepping into the cell. The small space instantly became a furnace. "You think this is a game? That I brought you here for my own amusement?" He stalked closer, his presence overwhelming. "The vision you saw was not a dream. The living shadow you spoke of is real. My pack's lore calls it the Blightfall, an ancient cold that devours light and life. It is prophesied to return, and the beacon is the only thing that holds it at bay. A beacon that has been weakening for generations." He was now so close I could feel the heat shimmering off his skin. "I have searched my entire life for the other half of the prophecy, the winter's heart that is meant to stand with the summer's fire. And all I have found is you, a cursed wolf who fears her own shadow." His words were a lash, stinging with the truth. But fear was a rational response. "That power, it hurts," I confessed, my voice trembling. "It feels like being torn apart." "Pain is a part of power," he said, his expression hardening. "You will learn to endure it." He reached for me again. "No!" I scrambled away, but there was nowhere to go. My back hit the wall. "I am not asking." His hand shot out, not grabbing my wrist this time, but pressing his palm flat against my chest, directly over my heart. The world shattered. It was an inferno and a blizzard colliding within my soul. His fire met my ice, and this time, there was no holding back. The vision ripped through us with brutal force. We were standing on that desolate peak again, the Sunstone Beacon pulsing weakly. But now we could feel the shadow, hear it. Whispers slithered through our minds, ancient and hungry, speaking in a language of pure despair. The Blightfall wasn't just a force. It was a consciousness, a sentient void that wanted to consume everything. It was waking up. My power, awakened by his touch and amplified by the beacon, erupted from me in an uncontrolled, visceral scream. A wave of absolute cold exploded outwards. The torches lining the cavern walls sputtered and died, their flames instantly extinguished. A sheet of black, shimmering ice, smooth as obsidian, spread from my feet, racing across the cavern floor and up the walls. The constant golden hum of the sunstone beacon faltered, its light dimming as if a veil had been thrown over it. The oppressive heat vanished, replaced by a profound, biting cold that felt like home to me, and a death sentence to him. Kael was thrown back, gasping, the frost mark on his hand glowing with a brilliant, painful white light. He stared at the ice-coated cavern, at the dimmed beacon, and then at me, with a look of pure, unadulterated shock. I was on my knees, panting, the black ember on my own hand glowing so fiercely it felt like it was burning through my skin. I had done that. I had nearly snuffed out the heart of the Sunstone Pack with a single, terrified outburst. By the ancestors, Kael breathed, his voice ragged. Before either of us could move, footsteps echoed from the tunnel. Alpha Kael! What is happening? The beacon's light. Seraphina burst into the cavern, flanked by 2 Sunstone warriors. She stopped dead, her eyes widening in horror at the scene. The ice, the darkness, the weakened beacon. Her gaze snapped to me, huddled in the cell, and her beautiful face twisted into a mask of righteous fury. She is the Blightfall! Seraphina shrieked, pointing a trembling finger. Can you not see it? She brings the endless winter. She is here to destroy us. Kill her. Kill her now before she drains the beacon completely. The warriors drew their blades, their fiery eyes locked on me with murderous intent. My wolf whimpered, bracing for the end. Hold! Kael's voice was a whip-crack of command. He rose to his full height, placing himself squarely between me and his warriors. The dim light of the beacon caught the conflicted storm in his eyes. He was the alpha, and his pack was demanding my death. But he was also the man who had seen the prophecy. She is not the Blightfall, he declared, his voice ringing with a certainty that shocked everyone, including me. She is the weapon meant to fight it. He turned his back on Seraphina and the warriors, facing me. He strode to the gate of my cell, the ice crunching under his boots, and unlocked it. He swung it open. Your training was supposed to begin today, he said, his voice low and intense, but I was wrong. Your imprisonment ends now. He offered me his hand, the one marked by my frost. Seraphina is right about one thing. You are too dangerous to be left alone. I stared at his outstretched hand, then up at his face, my heart pounding a frantic, icy rhythm. From now on, he said, his voice a low growl that was both a promise and a threat. You are my shadow. You do not eat, you do not sleep, you do not take a single step unless I am at your side. Your power is my responsibility now. Chapter 4. Sleep was impossible. The oppressive heat of the cavern, amplified by the constant golden pulse of the sunstone beacon, was a torment. It was like being slowly cooked alive. My own inner cold fought back, a desperate, losing battle that left my muscles aching and my mind frayed. I was a creature of winter trapped in the heart of an eternal summer. True to his word, Kael appeared at the first hint of light. The iron gate screeched open, the sound grating on my raw nerves. He stood there, framed by the cavern's golden glow, a formidable silhouette of power and authority. He carried no food, no water, only an unyielding resolve in his fiery eyes. Show me, he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. Summon the power you displayed in the Great Hall. I need to see it, to understand its limits. I shrank back against the hot stone wall of my cell. I can't, I whispered, and it was the truth. I don't control it. It just happened. Then make it happen, he growled, stepping into the cell. The small space instantly became a furnace. You think this is a game? That I brought you here for my own amusement? He stalked closer, his presence overwhelming. The vision you saw was not a dream. The living shadow you spoke of is real. My pack's lore calls it the Blightfall, an ancient cold that devours light and life. It is prophesied to return, and the beacon is the only thing that holds it at bay. A beacon that has been weakening for generations. He was now so close I could feel the heat shimmering off his skin. I have searched my entire life for the other half of the prophecy, the winter's heart that is meant to stand with the summer's fire. And all I have found is you. A cursed wolf who fears her own shadow. His words were a lash, stinging with the truth. But fear was a rational response. That power, it hurts, I confessed, my voice trembling. It feels like being torn apart. Pain is a part of power, he said, his expression hardening. You will learn to endure it. He reached for me again. No! I scrambled away, but there was nowhere to go. My back hit the wall. I am not asking. His hand shot out, not grabbing my wrist this time, but pressing his palm flat against my chest, directly over my heart. The world shattered. It was an inferno and a blizzard colliding within my soul. His fire met my ice, and this time, there was no holding back. The vision ripped through us with brutal force. We were standing on that desolate peak again, the sunstone beacon pulsing weakly. But now we could feel the shadow. Hear it. Whispers slithered through our minds, ancient and hungry, speaking in a language of pure despair. The Blightfall wasn't just a force. It was a consciousness, a sentient void that wanted to consume everything. It was waking up. My power, awakened by his touch and amplified by the beacon, erupted from me in an uncontrolled, visceral scream. A wave of absolute cold exploded outwards. The torches lining the cavern walls sputtered and died, their flames instantly extinguished. A sheet of black, shimmering ice, smooth as obsidian, spread from my feet, racing across the cavern floor and up the walls. The constant golden hum of the sunstone beacon faltered, its light dimming as if a veil had been thrown over it. The oppressive heat vanished, replaced by a profound, biting cold that felt like home to me, and a death sentence to him. Kael was thrown back, gasping, the frost mark on his hand glowing with a brilliant, painful white light. He stared at the ice-coated cavern, at the dimmed beacon, and then at me, with a look of pure, unadulterated shock. I was on my knees, panting, the black ember on my own hand glowing so fiercely it felt like it was burning through my skin. I had done that. I had nearly snuffed out the heart of the Sunstone Pack with a single, terrified outburst. By the ancestors, Kael breathed, his voice ragged. Before either of us could move, footsteps echoed from the tunnel. Alpha Kael! What is happening? The beacon's light. Seraphina burst into the cavern, flanked by 2 Sunstone warriors. She stopped dead, her eyes widening in horror at the scene. The ice, the darkness, the weakened beacon. Her gaze snapped to me, huddled in the cell, and her beautiful face twisted into a mask of righteous fury. She is the Blightfall! Seraphina shrieked, pointing a trembling finger. Can you not see it? She brings the endless winter. She is here to destroy us. Kill her. Kill her now before she drains the beacon completely. The warriors drew their blades, their fiery eyes locked on me with murderous intent. My wolf whimpered, bracing for the end. Hold! Kael's voice was a whip crack of command. He rose to his full height, placing himself squarely between me and his warriors. The dim light of the beacon caught the conflicted storm in his eyes. He was the Alpha, and his pack was demanding my death. But he was also the man who had seen the prophecy. "She is not the Blightfall," he declared, his voice ringing with a certainty that shocked everyone, including me. "She is the weapon meant to fight it." He turned his back on Seraphina and the warriors, facing me. He strode to the gate of my cell, the ice crunching under his boots, and unlocked it. He swung it open. "Your training was supposed to begin today," he said, his voice low and intense, "but I was wrong. Your imprisonment ends now." He offered me his hand, the one marked by my frost. "Seraphina is right about one thing. You are too dangerous to be left alone." I stared at his outstretched hand, then up at his face, my heart pounding a frantic, icy rhythm. "From now on," he said, his voice a low growl that was both a promise and a threat, "you are my shadow. You do not eat, you do not sleep, you do not take a single step unless I am at your side. Your power is my responsibility now." Chapter 6. The vision receded, leaving an unsettling stillness in the lodge. The air, once thick with anger and frustration, was now charged with the cold, heavy weight of destiny. The Deadlands. Even I, in my isolation, had heard the name spoken in hushed, fearful tones. A cursed, barren wasteland to the far north, where the spirits of ancient, forgotten wolves were said to roam. A place where the veil between worlds was thin, and the laws of nature did not apply. "We cannot go there," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "It's a suicide mission. No one returns from the Deadlands." Kael's fiery gaze met mine, and the grim certainty in his eyes swept away any room for argument. "We don't have a choice," he stated. "That archway we saw, the Blightfall's prison, it's failing." The vision was not a prophecy of a distant future. It was a warning of what is happening now. He turned and strode to a large carved chest, throwing it open. Inside, maps and ancient scrolls were carefully arranged. He pulled one out, a weathered, hand-drawn map of the Northern Territories. His finger traced a path past familiar mountain ranges and into a vast, unlabeled expanse at the very top. "The journey will take weeks, through the harshest terrain on the continent," he said, his voice a low rumble. "We will be exposed, and we will be alone." Alone? The word sounded naive as soon as I said it. Of course we would be alone. Who would follow us into a land of ghosts and shadows? As if on cue, the doors to the lodge burst open. An elder of the Sunstone Pack, his fur streaked with gray, and his face a roadmap of old scars, stood there, flanked by Seraphina. His name was Gannon, Kael's chief advisor. "Alpha," Gannon said, his voice heavy with disapproval. "The pack is on edge." They felt the beacon dim. They fear the Frost-Blight's influence. "You cannot keep her here among us." "She will not be staying," Kael replied without looking up from the map. "We are leaving." Seraphina stepped forward, her expression a venomous mix of triumph and suspicion. "You are banishing her, then?" "Finally, you see reason." "I am not banishing her," Kael said, finally lifting his gaze. The full force of his alpha authority hit them, a wave of heat and power that made the elder take an involuntary step back. "I am going with her. To the Deadlands." A shocked silence filled the room. Gannon stared at his alpha as if he had lost his mind. "The Deadlands?" the elder choked out. "Kael, that is madness. A folk tale. You would abandon your pack, your duties to chase a ghost story with this creature?" "This creature," Kael snarled, stepping away from the maps to confront them, "holds the key to stopping the Blightfall. Her power, the very cold you fear, is the only thing that can reinforce the failing wards we saw in our vision." "Vision?" Seraphina scoffed. "Or a trick? A glamour she has woven to lead you to your death so she can usurp your power?" The accusation hung in the air, insidious and plausible to a pack already steeped in fear. I felt a familiar, cold dread seep into my heart. She was twisting my curse into a weapon, painting me as a manipulative seductress. "You dare accuse me of being so easily swayed?" Kael's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. He took a predatory step toward Seraphina, who, for the first time, looked truly afraid. "You have forgotten your place, Seraphina. You are a guest in my territory. Do not mistake my hospitality for weakness." He turned his back on her, a gesture of ultimate dismissal, and faced Ganon. "Gather the supplies. 2 horses, rations for a month. We leave in 1 hour." "My Alpha, I must advise against this," Ganon pleaded, his loyalty warring with his deep-seated fear. "The pack will not understand. They need their Alpha here, guarding the beacon, not chasing shadows in a cursed land. Let me send a party of warriors with her. If she is the key, they can force her to do what is necessary." "Force her?" Kael let out a sharp, humorless laugh. He gestured to me. "Her power is tied to mine. Look at our hands." He held up his frost-marked hand, and I instinctively raised my own, showing the ember mark. "We are bound to this fate. Apart, we are incomplete. Her power, without my fire to temper it, is a blizzard without direction. My fire, without her ice to focus it, is a wild fire without control. We go together, or we do not go at all." The finality in his tone was absolute. Ganon saw it, his shoulders slumping in defeat. He gave me one last look, a mixture of terror and loathing, before bowing his head. "As you command, Alpha." He turned and left, his duty overriding his dissent. Seraphina lingered for a moment, her eyes drilling into me with pure, undiluted hatred. "If you lead him to his death," she whispered, her voice a snake's hiss, "there is no corner of this world you can hide from me. I will find you, and I will tear the marrow from your bones." She spun on her heel and stormed out. The lodge was silent once more, the air thick with the promise of a perilous journey and the certainty of enemies left behind. "Can you fight?" Kael asked abruptly, turning his attention back to me. I was taken aback by the question. "I can hunt." "That's not what I asked," he said, his gaze intense. "The Deadlands are not empty. There are creatures there, twisted by the encroaching blight. Can you defend yourself?" "My pack never trained me," I admitted, a bitter taste in my mouth. I was not considered worth the effort. He grunted, a sound of disgust aimed at my pack's weakness. He strode to the wall and pulled down 2 long, wicked-looking daggers from their sheaths. He tossed one to me. It was heavy, the hilt warm in my cold hand. "There is no time to train you," he said, strapping the other to his own belt. "So you will learn on the path." He looked at me then, truly looked at me, and his expression was grim. "What we are about to do? It is likely we will not survive. But the Blightfall will not be the only thing trying to kill us. His own pack would hunt them down, and so would Seraphina. We have one chance. We cannot fail." An hour later, we were mounted, our horses laden with supplies. The entire Sunstone Pack had gathered to watch us leave. They did not cheer. They did not offer blessings for our journey. They stood in stark, hostile silence, a sea of fiery eyes watching as their Alpha rode out of their territory, with a creature of ice at his side, into the land of the dead. Chapter 7. The world grew colder with every league we traveled north. The last vestiges of the Sunstone's geothermal warmth bled away, replaced by a landscape of stark, gray rock and skeletal forests. The sky was a permanent, bruised twilight. The sun a pale, distant memory. We rode in silence, a heavy, oppressive quiet broken only by the crunch of our horses' hooves on the frost-hardened ground and the mournful sigh of the wind. Kael was a machine, a being forged of pure, relentless forward motion. He set a brutal pace, stopping only when the horses were on the verge of collapse. He never complained, never showed fatigue, He was the alpha, the embodiment of endurance, and he expected me to be the same. I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me falter. My body, accustomed to the cold, handled the plunging temperatures better than his horses. But the sheer physical toll of the ride was an agony I bore in silence. Every muscle screamed. But I locked the pain behind the same icy mask I had worn my entire life. On the fourth day, the wind changed. It carried a new scent on its back, not of snow or pine, but of decay and a strange metallic tang, like old blood and ozone. It was a smell of wrongness. We found its source an hour later. A lone wolf lay in the center of our path. It was gaunt, its gray fur patchy and matted, its ribs stark against its hide. But it was the creature's eyes that made my blood run cold. They were a milky, sightless white, yet they tracked our approach with an unnerving focus. It wasn't the familiar energy of a living wolf. It was an empty vessel, animated by something else. A faint, chilling aura radiated from it, a whisper of the same void-like cold as the Blightfall, and it resonated with a sick hum against my own power. Kael dismounted, his hand resting on the hilt of his dagger. "Blight touched," he murmured, his voice grim. The wolf made no sound. It simply rose on jerky, unsteady legs and began to shamble toward us. It wasn't an attack. It was a horrifyingly blank, instinctless movement. There was no rage in it, no fear, only emptiness. This was the fate the Blightfall promised. A slow, hollowing decay that left nothing of the soul behind. The sight of it was more terrifying than any snarling beast. With a fluid, practiced motion, Kael drew his blade. His face was a mask of cold duty, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, pity, perhaps, or a deep-seated rage at the corruption of a noble creature. He moved forward, and with one swift, merciful strike, ended the wolf's unnatural existence. He stood over the body for a long moment, the silence of the forest pressing in. "The blight spreads faster than the lore predicted," he said, his voice a low growl. He looked at me, his fiery eyes searching mine. "We may already be too late." That night we made camp in the shadow of a monolithic rock formation that looked like a giant's teeth. The temperature plummeted, and the wind howled through the rocks, with a voice that sounded disturbingly like whispers. Kael built a large, roaring fire, its light and heat pushing back the oppressive dark. As always, I settled on the far edge of the fire's reach, my cloak wrapped tightly around me, the dagger he'd given me resting on my lap. He sat opposite me, sharpening his own blade against a whetstone, the rhythmic shut-ink of steel on stone the only sound between us. "You fear the fire more than the dark," he stated, his eyes never leaving his work. "Fire burns," I replied, my voice quiet. "The dark is just empty. I'm used to empty." He paused, looking up. The firelight cast dancing shadows across the hard planes of his face, softening the harsh lines of the alpha and revealing the weary wolf beneath. "Why did you never leave?" he asked, the question catching me off guard. "Your pack cast you out. You possess a knowledge of the wilderness few have. You could have disappeared, found a place where no one knew your name." The question was more personal than anything he'd ever asked. I thought of Lyra, the one fragile link to a life I never had. There was someone I could not bear to leave behind completely, I admitted. A sister. He nodded slowly, a flicker of understanding in his gaze. "Family," he said, the word holding a world of weight. "It is the chain that binds us, even when it feels like a cage." He fell silent again. But the nature of the quiet had changed. It was no longer hostile or empty. It was contemplative, a shared space carved out of the vast, threatening wilderness. He finished sharpening his blade and looked at the fire, his expression distant. "My father was the alpha before me," he said, his voice a low murmur. He spent his life studying the lore, preparing me for the Blightfall's return. He believed the prophecy was our pack's sacred duty. He drove himself to an early grave under the weight of it. His hand, the one marked by my frost, clenched into a fist. I will not let his sacrifice be for nothing. For the first time, I saw the immense burden he carried. He wasn't just an alpha leading a pack. He was the inheritor of a desperate, centuries-old war. He was as much a prisoner of this prophecy as I was. As the hours wore on and the fire burned low, I drifted into a fitful, shallow sleep. But my dreams were not my own. The whispers from the wind coiled their way into my mind, slithering and insidious. They spoke of an endless, peaceful cold. They promised an end to pain, an end to the burning heat of emotion, an end to the struggle. Join us. Be one with the quiet. Let go. I woke with a gasp, my heart hammering an icy rhythm. The fire was little more than glowing embers. Kael was asleep, his breathing deep and even. I looked over at him, and my breath caught in my throat. The frost mark on his hand was glowing. A faint, pulsing, sickly white light that seemed to answer the whispers in my head. He was tossing in his sleep, his brow furrowed in a silent battle. The Deadlands weren't just a place we were traveling to. They were already here, inside us, reaching for the parts of our souls that echoed their nature. They were reaching for his fire through my ice. Chapter 8. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. The whispers weren't just a bad dream, they were an active assault, a sentient corruption trying to sink its tendrils into Kael's soul. And it was using me, our fated link, as the bridge. The sight of the sickly white light pulsing on his hand was a violation, a defilement of the mark that bound us. I had to do something. My first instinct was to shake him awake, to shout his name and break the dream's hold. But the whispers had felt so insidious, so deep. What if waking him wasn't enough? What if the tendril of blight had already taken root? Curses are just power without a name, he had said. My cold was a shield. It was time to see if it could protect more than just myself. Scrambling across the frozen ground, I knelt beside him. The heat rolling off his sleeping form was a stark contrast to the deathly chill the Blightfall projected. I hesitated for only a second, the memory of our explosive, painful touches a stark warning. But the memory of the empty-eyed wolf on the path was stronger. I would not let that happen to him. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I reached out. I didn't grab him. Instead, I gently placed my palm over the back of his hand, directly on top of the glowing frost mark. The connection was immediate, but different. It wasn't an explosion of opposing forces. It was a targeted invasion. Through our bond, I could feel the blight's influence, a thin, parasitic thread of utter cold, not the clean, natural cold of my own power, but a stagnant, life-draining void. It was trying to anchor itself to his inner fire, to poison it from within. I closed my eyes and focused, not on defense, but on offense. I gathered my own power, the pure, pristine ice at the core of my being, and pushed. I channeled it through my hand, down the conduit of our bond, directly into the mark. I was fighting ice with ice, a blizzard against a creeping frost. Kael let out a low groan, his body convulsing in his sleep. His inner fire fought back against my intrusion, a primal, instinctual defense. I felt a surge of heat rush up my arm, painful and blistering. But I held on, gritting my teeth. "Fight it," I whispered, my voice a ragged plea. "Not me." For a moment, it was a brutal three-way war inside him. My ice, his fire, and the blight's void. I pushed harder, pouring every ounce of my will into my assault, visualizing my cold as a clean, sharp shard of glacier ice, shattering the brittle, stagnant frost of the blight. The sickly white glow on his hand flickered violently, then, with a final, desperate pulse, it vanished. The parasitic thread was severed. Kael's eyes snapped open. He shot up with a roar, his hand clamping around my wrist like a vice, yanking me off balance. His fiery amber eyes were wild, disoriented, and full of a predator's rage. "What did you do?" he snarled, his grip threatening to crush my bones. "The whispers!" I gasped, the pain from his grip making my vision swim. "They were in your head." "The mark. It was glowing. The Blight was using our bond to get to you." His gaze dropped from my face to his hand, then back to my wrist, which he was still crushing. He saw the pure, unadulterated fear in my eyes, and the fury in his own began to recede, replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding. He released me so abruptly I fell back onto the frozen earth. He stared at his hand, flexing his fingers as if it were foreign to him. "I remember," he murmured, his voice rough. "A dream. Of ice. A peaceful, endless sleep. It felt welcoming." "It's a lie," I said, rubbing my bruised wrist. "It wants to hollow you out just like that wolf." He looked at me then. Truly looked at me. The last traces of suspicion and command in his eyes melted away, replaced by something I had never seen directed at me before. Respect. He, the great Sunstone Alpha, had been vulnerable, and I, the cursed Exile, had protected him. The dynamic between us had just been irrevocably altered. We were no longer keeper and prisoner, or commander and weapon. We were partners in a war that was already being waged inside our very souls. "Thank you," he said. The two words were quiet, almost rough, as if they were difficult for him to form, but they held more weight than any alpha decree he had ever uttered. Before I could respond, a sound cut through the pre-dawn stillness, shattering the fragile moment. A howl. But it was wrong. It was a high, thin, keening sound, utterly devoid of the life and spirit of a true wolf's call. It was the sound of pure, desolate emptiness given a voice. Kael was on his feet in an instant, his dagger in his hand. Another howl answered the first, closer this time, and then another, and another, from all sides. The whispers on the wind had been a prelude. Now the main assault was coming. Shadowy forms began to emerge from between the skeletal trees, their movements jerky and unnatural. A pack of them. At least a dozen blight-touched wolves, their eyes glowing with the same milky, sightless white light, were slowly, silently surrounding our camp. Chapter 9. There was no strategy in the blight-touched wolves' attack, no pack coordination, only a relentless, unified hunger. They moved with a lurching, unnatural gait, a tide of gray fur and milky white eyes that flowed toward the dying embers of our fire. "Back to back!" Kael's voice was a blade cutting through the terrifying silence. He shoved me behind him, placing his body between me and the closest wave of creatures. "Don't let them corner you. Aim for the head or the heart. It's the only way to sever the Blight's connection." He was a whirlwind of motion. His dagger became an extension of his arm, a blur of dark steel that met the first lunge with brutal efficiency. He didn't waste a single movement. It was a dance of death, precise and deadly. He sidestepped a snapping jaw, his blade flashing up to open the creature's throat, and spun to drive his heel into the chest of another, sending it staggering back before he finished it with a swift, clean strike. I was frozen, my dagger clutched in a white-knuckled grip. My mind screamed at me to move, to fight. But my body was locked in a terror I hadn't felt since I was a child. These weren't wolves, they were puppets, corpses animated by a malevolent will, and their sheer wrongness paralyzed me. One of them broke past Kael's deadly arc, its sightless eyes fixed on me. It launched itself forward, and I stumbled backward, tripping over a loose rock. I fell hard, the air knocked from my lungs, the dagger flying from my grasp. The creature was on me in an instant, its hot, rancid breath washing over my face. Its jaws, lined with yellowed teeth, opened wide. "Elara!" Kael roared, his voice thick with a desperation that shattered my paralysis. I screamed. Not a sound of fear, but a raw, visceral cry of pure, instinctual power. The ground between me and the wolf erupted. A wall of jagged, black ice spears, sharp as obsidian, shot upwards with explosive force. The blight-touched wolf was impaled mid-lunge, its unnatural momentum carrying it forward onto the spikes. It hung there, twitching for a moment, before going still. I stared, chest heaving, at the grotesque sculpture my terror had created. I had done that. Not with a thought, not with intent, but with a scream. Kael dispatched another wolf and glanced over his shoulder. His eyes widened for a fraction of a second at the sight of the ice wall, but there was no time for shock. His strategy shifted instantly. "Good," he grunted, a sound of grim approval. "Now do it again!" The ground, Elara. Freeze the ground beneath them. His command was an anchor in the storm of chaos. I pushed myself to my feet, my fear transmuting into a cold, desperate fury. I slammed my hands down onto the frozen earth, pouring my will, my power, my entire being into the ground. A wave of intense cold radiated from me. The rocky clearing around us was instantly sheathed in a layer of treacherous black ice. The charging wolves, so single-minded in their advance, were completely unprepared. Their paws slid out from under them. They crashed into each other, a chaotic pile of flailing limbs and snapping jaws. Their momentum was broken. "Now!" Kael yelled. He moved among them like a reaper, his blade a fiery blur against the darkness. He took advantage of their every slip, their every stumble. His fire met my ice not as an enemy, but as a perfect, deadly complement. Where I created chaos, he brought a swift and terrible order. We fell into a rhythm. He would call out a command. "Left flank," a barrier, and I would react, my power lashing out, creating walls, spikes, and slicks of ice. He was no longer just protecting me. He was directing me, using my power as a weapon he himself could wield. Only one remained. It had been more cunning than the others, circling the edge of the ice field. It saw its moment as Kael finished another creature, and lunged, not at him, but at me. There was no time for a wall, no time for Kael to intervene. I threw my hands up in a desperate, warding gesture. There was no explosion. Instead, a dozen razor-sharp icicles, each the length of my forearm, materialized in the air before me and shot forward like darts from a bow. They struck the wolf in the chest and throat. It crumpled to the ground, its unnatural life extinguished. Silence. The only sounds were our own ragged breaths, misting in the profound cold I had created. We stood back to back in the center of a circle of death, surrounded by the still forms of the blight-touched, on a battlefield of our own making. Steam rose where Kael's heat touched my ice. Slowly, Kael turned to face me. He was breathing heavily, a cut bleeding freely on his forearm. He looked from my face to the carnage I had wrought. The impaled wolf, the frozen ground, the icicle-peppered corpse at my feet. The apprehension in his eyes was gone. The frustration he'd shown during our training had vanished. A slow, grim smile touched his lips. It wasn't a smile of warmth or kindness. It was the smile of a warrior who has just seen a new, impossibly powerful weapon unveiled on the battlefield. "You learn fast," he said, his voice a low, rough murmur of respect. "Now, let's get out of here before the rest of their pack arrives." Chapter 10. The adrenaline from the fight drained away, leaving a bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. The clearing was a grotesque tableau of ice and death, silent save for the wind that had returned to whisper its mournful secrets through the trees. My own power receded, and the immense cold I had generated began to feel foreign again, a tool I had used but did not yet understand. Kael let out a sharp, pained hiss, breaking the spell. He was clutching his forearm, where dark, sluggish blood was seeping through a long, ragged gash in his tunic. One of the blight-touched had gotten through his guard. "We need to clean that," I said, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. "The blight. We don't know if its touch carries the corruption." He glanced down at the wound, his expression grim. "It doesn't. The blight corrupts the spirit, not the flesh. But the wound is deep." He moved toward the meager shelter of the rocks, his movements stiff. The Alpha, the pillar of strength, was wounded, and we were weeks from any hope of a healer. He began to unstrap the leather bracer on his arm, his jaw tight with pain. "We rest for an hour, then we move. Their howls will have carried for miles. This was just a scouting party." I watched him struggle with a buckle, his fingers clumsy with the cold and pain. The warrior who had effortlessly dispatched a dozen creatures was now fumbling with a simple strap. Something shifted inside me. The fear, the resentment, the years of cowering, they felt like a snake's shed skin, a part of me I was leaving behind on this icy battlefield. "Let me," I said, stepping forward. He froze, his head snapping up. His fiery eyes were wary, his body tensing. The instinct to recoil from my touch was etched into his every muscle. "You're cold. Will be better than a festering wound," I finished for him, my tone leaving no room for argument. For the first time, I was not the one being commanded. He hesitated for a long, tense moment. He looked from my outstretched hands to the wound on his arm, and a silent battle was waged and lost in his eyes. With a low, frustrated grunt, he sank onto a rock and held out his arm. It was an act of profound, unwilling trust. I knelt before him. My heart hammered against my ribs, a cold, frantic beat. This was different from defending him. This was helping, healing in its own way. An act of care I had never been allowed to offer anyone. My fingers, chilled as winter stone, brushed against his skin as I unfastened the bracer. He flinched, a sharp intake of breath. But he didn't pull away. I worked quickly, my touch surprisingly deft as I peeled back the torn, blood-soaked fabric of his tunic. The gash was long and deep, already beginning to look inflamed in the frigid air. I took a strip of clean linen from my pack and dipped it in my water skin, the water threatening to freeze the moment it touched the air. As I began to clean the wound, an idea, born of instinct, and our shared battle took shape in my mind. "Stay still," I murmured. "This might feel strange." Before he could protest, I placed my free hand gently on his arm, a few inches below the wound. I closed my eyes, not reaching for the explosive, lashing power I'd used in the fight, but for a different aspect of it. A focused, numbing cold. I visualized the flow of blood slowing, the angry heat of the inflammation being soothed, the raw nerves being quieted by a precise surgical frost. Kael's entire body went rigid. "What are you doing?" he ground out through clenched teeth. "I'm trying to help," I whispered, concentrating. A faint, shimmering frost, delicate as a spider's web, spread from my fingertips, encasing his skin. It wasn't the black, menacing ice from the battle, but a clean, silver white. I could feel the frantic pounding of his pulse beneath my palm begin to steady. The tension in his muscles eased slightly. The deep, agonizing throb of the wound was being muted by my power. "The pain," he breathed, his voice a mixture of shock and disbelief. "It's less." "Good," I said, focusing all my will on keeping the cold controlled, therapeutic. "It seems my curse has its uses." He didn't reply. He simply watched, his amber eyes wide with a new kind of wonder, as I finished cleaning and binding the wound. My controlled cold had not only numbed the pain, but had also stopped the bleeding completely. When I was done, I pulled my hand back. The silver frost on his arm sublimated into a faint mist, and the connection was broken. The silence that fell between us was different now. It was no longer a void, but a space filled with unspoken revelations. He was not just my commander. I was not just his weapon. We were something more. Something essential to one another. He flexed his bandaged hand, then looked at me, his gaze piercing. "You have never done that before." It was a statement, not a question. "I have never had a reason to," I replied softly. He held my gaze for a long moment, 1,000 emotions I couldn't decipher swirling in the depths of his eyes. He opened his mouth to say something, but then closed it, as if the words were not yet ready to be spoken. Instead, he simply nodded. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, of acceptance, that was more powerful than any verbal praise. He rose to his feet, his movements less stiff now. "You were right," he said, his voice a low rumble that resonated deep within me. "We were too late. But now I think we might just have a chance." He looked out at the dead, empty-eyed wolves, then back to the path that led north into the ever-deepening twilight. "The Blightfall is hunting us now," he said, his grim smile returning. "Let's not keep it waiting." Chapter 11. We rode side by side. It was a small change, a simple shift in formation, but it altered the very air between us. I was no longer the prisoner trailing behind the Alpha. I was his fellow traveler, his equal on this cursed path. The silence that stretched between us was no longer a chasm of hostility, but a shared space of grim understanding. Kael began to speak, his voice a low rumble against the oppressive quiet. He told me of the Deadlands, not the myths whispered by frightened pups, but the truths gleaned from his pack's ancient lore. He spoke of the Blightfall not as a monster, but as a cosmic hunger, a sentient void that predated the first wolves. He explained that the archway we had seen was a seal, forged by the first Alphas who had paid with their own life force to imprison the entity. They knew it would not hold forever, he said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. They prophesied the coming of two wolves, born of opposing poles, whose combined power could relight the dying embers of the seal, summer's fire and winter's heart. "And you believe that's us?" I stated, the words feeling heavy and unreal. "Belief is a luxury," he countered, his amber eyes meeting mine. "All I have is evidence. Our marks, our visions. The way your ice answered my fire in that battle." He looked at my hands, which rested on the pommel of my saddle. "And what you did for my wound. That was not the work of a curse, Elara. That was the work of a healer." The landscape grew more alien with each passing hour. The skeletal trees of the outer Deadlands gave way to something far worse. Here the trees were petrified, turning to black, crumbling dust at the slightest touch. The streams we crossed ran not with water, but with a sluggish, oily black liquid that seemed to absorb the light. The very air felt thin and brittle, and the whispers on the wind were no longer just a suggestion. They were a constant, maddening murmur just at the edge of hearing. The blight was not just passing through this land, it was consuming it, unmaking it. Late in the afternoon, we came to a stop. Before us lay a chasm, a great, jagged wound in the earth, at least 50 feet across. It wasn't a natural formation. The edges were too sharp, too clean, as if a giant, unseen claw had ripped the world open. The air above it shimmered with a visible distortion, a haze of corrupting energy that made my teeth ache. "A blight scar," Kael breathed, his face grim. "The lore spoke of them. Places where the void has physically torn the veil between worlds." "We can't cross that," I said, stating the obvious. The horses were already backing away, their eyes wide with terror. "We have to," Kael insisted. "The path to the archway is on the other side. Going around would take weeks we do not have." He dismounted, approaching the edge cautiously. He held out his hand, and the shimmering haze seemed to writhe, drawn to the heat of his skin. He snatched it back. "It feeds on life force, on warmth. Trying to cross it would drain a wolf dry in seconds." He looked at the chasm, then at me, and I saw an idea dawn in his eyes. A desperate, terrifying plan. My fire alone would be consumed, he said, thinking aloud. And your ice would be too brittle. The blight would shatter it. But what if it wasn't just ice? I finished, my heart beginning to pound with a mixture of fear and a strange, exhilarating thrill. What if it was ice tempered with fire? He nodded, his gaze intense. We have to build a bridge. Together. It was the ultimate test. Not a battle against a physical foe, but a creative act of combined will, requiring a level of synchronization we had never attempted. We stood at the edge of the chasm, facing each other. We have to link, he said. Focus the power through a single point. Give me your hands. I placed my cold palms in his warm ones. The familiar thrum of our bond surged between us, but this time we didn't fight it. We welcomed it, embraced it, let our opposing energies swirl together into a single, potent current. I will project the foundation, he commanded, his voice a low, focused growl. A bridge of pure heat. You must encase it instantly. Reinforce it with your cold. It has to be a perfect fusion. Are you ready? I met his gaze and gave a single, sharp nod. He closed his eyes and I felt his power surge. A shimmering, translucent ribbon of golden energy shot out from our linked hands, stretching across the chasm. The blight scar beneath it hissed and roiled, lunging at the heat, trying to devour it. Now, Elara! Now! He roared, sweat beading on his brow from the strain. I focused, channeling my power with a precision I had never known I possessed. I didn't unleash a blizzard. I wove a structure. A lattice of hard, clear ice flowed from my hands, wrapping around his ribbon of fire, encasing it in a solid, crystalline shell. Where my ice met his fire, it didn't melt. It fused, creating a bridge of impossible material that glowed with a soft, internal light. The strain was immense. It felt like holding a star in one hand and a glacier in the other, and forcing them to dance. Through our linked hands, I felt the crushing weight of his alpha's duty, the centuries of expectation. He, in turn, felt the profound, aching loneliness of my 2 decades of isolation. The deep, silent cold that had nothing to do with my power. Our strengths and our sorrows flowed between us, forging something stronger than ice or fire. It's holding, I gasped, my vision starting to blur at the edges. We have to cross, he said, his voice strained. We can't maintain this for long. Keeping one hand linked, we turned and stepped onto our creation. The bridge held firm beneath our feet, a beacon of defiant light over a chasm of absolute despair. We moved as one, each step a testament to our newfound unity. We were halfway across when the bridge began to groan, the light flickering. The blight scar was fighting back, its hunger intensifying. Faster, Kael urged, pulling me along. We scrambled the last few feet, leaping onto the far side just as the bridge behind us shattered with a sound like 1,000 breaking mirrors, collapsing into the hungry void below. We lay on the cold ground, panting, our hands still clasped, our energies completely spent. We had done it. We had crossed the uncrossable. He rolled onto his side to face me, his amber eyes bright with exhaustion and a raw, unguarded emotion I had never seen before. I could feel it, he whispered, his voice rough. Your entire life. All that cold, all that silence. And I felt yours, I breathed back. All that weight. He didn't let go of my hand. He simply tightened his grip, a silent acknowledgement that we had just crossed more than a chasm. We were in the heart of the Deadlands now, beyond any map, with only each other to rely on. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the touch of another. Of course, the bond has been forged. Now the Deadlands will test its strength in ways they cannot imagine. Here's the next chapter, Chapter 12. The world slowly filtered back in, sharp and cold. We were lying on the brittle black rock, our hands still entwined. The raw, intimate knowledge of each other's deepest pain, his crushing duty, my aching solitude, hummed between us, a current far more powerful than the one that had forged our bridge. It was Kael who pulled away first, but the movement was reluctant, his fingers lingering against mine for a fraction of a second too long. He rose to his feet, the Alpha's mask of command settling back onto his features. But it was different now. It was thinner, and I could see the weary wolf beneath it. "We move," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. The energy we just expended. The blight will have felt it like a dinner bell. He was right. The air had changed. The constant low whispers had sharpened, coalescing into something more focused, more intelligent. They were no longer a general murmur of despair. They were specific, targeted, and they knew our names. Alpha, who walks to his doom. You have failed them. The fire dies. The whispers slithered into Kael's mind. I saw it in the sudden tension in his shoulders, the tightening of his jaw. Frost-Blight. Your sister grows cold. The one you could not save? A shard of ice, colder than any I could create, pierced my heart. The whispers were using the very vulnerabilities we had just shared, twisting our pain into weapons. "Don't listen," I said, my voice sharp. "It's a lie." "The blight doesn't need to lie," Kael countered, his gaze sweeping the alien landscape. "It only needs to show us the truths we fear most." The path forward descended into a valley shrouded in a thick, perpetual fog. It clung to the ground, swirling in unnatural eddies, and it smelled of wet ash and regret. Every step we took into the mist felt like a step into a memory. Suddenly, Kael stopped, his body rigid. He was staring into the fog, his amber eyes wide with a horror he had not shown even when facing a dozen blight-touched wolves. "No," he breathed. "Kael, what is it?" I moved to his side, but he didn't seem to see me. "The beacon," he choked out. "It's gone dark." I followed his gaze and my blood ran cold. Through a break in the fog, I saw it, the Sunstone cavern, but it was dark, the great crystal a dead gray stone. Around it, his pack lay still, their forms covered in a creeping black frost. Seraphina stood over Ganon's body, her face streaked with tears, and pointed an accusing finger directly at Kael. "He abandoned us. He left us to die." "It's an illusion," I insisted, grabbing his arm. His skin was fever-hot. "Kael, look at me. It's not real." But the vision was a poison, feeding his deepest fear. "I left them unprotected," he rasped, his guilt a tangible force. "For this. For you." The whispers intensified, coiling around his despair. "You chose the curse over your pack." My own terror threatened to swallow me as the fog swirled, and the vision changed. It was my turn. Before me stood my sister, Lyra, but her warm, loving eyes were cold and empty. Patches of the same black frost crept up her neck. "Why didn't you stay?" her voice echoed, full of hollow accusation. "You could have protected me. But you ran away with him." The pain was a physical blow. The one person I had stayed for, the one reason I had endured my exile, was being consumed because of my choice. "This is your fault. You bring the cold to everyone you love." My power flared instinctively, a shield of ice trying to form around my breaking heart. But then I felt Kael's hand, hot and firm, grip my shoulder. "Look at the frost on her," he said, his voice a low, urgent growl, his own eyes still haunted but now fighting back. "It's wrong. It's the blight's cold, Elara. Stagnant, dead. It is not your cold." His words were a spark of fire in my icy despair. He was right. The frost in the illusion felt different. It was the parasitic void, not the clean, sharp power that was my own. He was using his own nature, his connection to fire and life, to see the truth in my illusion. I had to do the same for him. "And your beacon," I said, my voice gaining strength as I forced myself to see past the pain. The heat in your vision. It feels wrong. It's a dying fire, Kael. An echo. It doesn't have the living heart of your true flame. We stood there, in the heart of that malevolent fog, clinging to each other, using the truth of our own natures as an anchor against the Blight's lies. We became each other's reality. Together, he breathed. Together, I affirmed. We focused, not on the visions but on each other, on the thrumming link between our marked hands. We poured our combined will into the world around us, a silent, unified roar of defiance. His fire and my ice erupted outwards, not as a bridge, but as a cleansing wave. The heat burned away the cold lies, the ice shattered the false images. The fog screamed, a high, thin sound of 1,000 tormented voices, and then it evaporated, torn apart by a power it could not corrupt. The valley was clear. There was no dead pack, no dying sister. There was only a single, massive creature standing before us. It had the form of a great stag, but its body was made of gnarled, petrified wood, and its antlers were jagged shards of black, light-absorbing rock. Its eyes were 2 burning pits of milky white energy. It was the source of the illusions, an ancient guardian corrupted by the Blight. It let out a bellow that was the physical embodiment of the whispers, and charged. We didn't need to speak. We moved as one. He lunged to the left, drawing its attention, his dagger a flickering flame. I went right, dropping to one knee and slamming my palms against the ground. The earth at the creature's feet erupted, not with spikes, but with chains of black ice that snaked up its legs, binding it, anchoring it. The guardian roared in fury, shattering the chains, but it had been delayed for only a second. It was all Kael needed. He was on its back, his dagger plunging deep into the space between its shoulder blades, where its corrupted heart pulsed with a foul white light. The creature thrashed, but Kael held on, a rider of fire on a beast of shadow. He roared, and a torrent of his own life force, pure, untamed fire, poured through the dagger and into the guardian. The blight-touched stag screamed, and its body began to glow from within, cracks of orange light spreading across its petrified hide. With a final deafening crack, the creature exploded, not into gore, but into a shower of dead, gray ash and fading whispers. We stood in the now silent valley, panting, covered in the creature's dust. We had survived. We had trusted. And there, at the far end of the valley, visible for the first time, was our destination. The ancient, rune-covered archway stood stark against the bruised purple sky. A final, looming gateway on the edge of the world. Chapter 13. The silence in the valley was a fragile, brittle thing. The dust of the fallen guardian settled around us, and all that remained was the path to the archway. It stood like a titan's ribcage against the bruised sky, a monument to a long-forgotten war. And the air around it was thick with a power so ancient and vast, it made my own feel like a flickering candle. We moved forward, our exhaustion a heavy cloak on our shoulders. With every step closer, the pressure intensified. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a physical weight that seemed to press the very air from my lungs. The runes carved into the massive stone archway were barely visible. Their once powerful glow faded to a faint, dying pulse, like the last embers of a forgotten fire. The ground beneath the arch was a roiling, inky blackness. It wasn't a shadow. It was the absence of everything. Light, sound, heat, life. It was the Blightfall itself, a raw, exposed wound in the fabric of the world. As we reached the base of the arch, the whispers stopped. They were replaced by a single, disembodied voice that echoed not in our ears, but directly in the center of our minds. It was a voice made of 1 billion silent screams, a voice of absolute despair. Yet its words were as smooth and tempting as poisoned honey. "You have come far, little flames," it spoke to us both. "You have fought. You are weary. But your war is over." The world around Kael seemed to shimmer and dissolve. I felt his grip on my hand tighten, and through our bond I saw what he saw. He was standing in the Sunstone cavern, but it was brighter than ever. The beacon a blazing sun of pure, untroubled power. His father stood before him, not as a weary, prophecy-haunted man, but healthy and proud. His pack was prosperous, their faces full of joy. There was no burden, no ancient duty, no endless fight. There was only peace. This can be your reality, son of fire. The voice purred in his mind. Lay down your burden. Your father's duty is fulfilled. Your pack is safe forever. You need only rest. I felt the pull of it, the profound temptation to let him accept, to see the crushing weight lifted from his soul. But I also felt the lie. The peace was a sterile, silent thing. The joy on the pack's faces was blank. It was the peace of a world without struggle, and therefore, without meaning. It's the peace of the void, I said aloud, my voice cutting through his vision. It's empty, Kael. The illusion shattered. He blinked, shaking his head as if waking from a dream, his breath coming in ragged gasps. It felt so real. And you, daughter of ice, the voice turned its terrible, intimate focus on me. Do you not tire of the cold? My world dissolved. I was standing in the Timberfang Great Hall, bathed in the warm, golden light of a summer festival. I was a child again, and my mother was alive, her arms wrapped around me in a warm, loving embrace. My father looked at me with open, unashamed pride. Lyra laughed beside me. The pack surrounded us, their faces full of affection. There was no curse, no exile, no cold. There was only the warmth and love I had craved my entire life. You were never meant to be a monster, the voice whispered, its tone one of profound, sorrowful pity. You were meant for this, for warmth, for love. Let go of the cold, let go of him. We can give you the life you were denied. Tears streamed down my face. The sheer, agonizing beauty of the offer was a physical pain. Every fiber of my being screamed to accept it, to sink into that beautiful, warm lie and never wake up. But then I felt Kael's hand, a searing, grounding heat in my cold one. I felt the echo of his burden, the reality of his struggle. It was a painful, heavy truth, but it was real. Our shared pain was more real than this perfect, hollow warmth. No, I whispered, the word a tear-soaked blade. The cold is a part of me, and so is he. My vision shattered. I was back in the Deadlands, kneeling before the archway, Kael's hand gripping mine like a lifeline. We had faced the void's ultimate temptation and chosen the beautiful, terrible truth of our own existence. The Blightfall's voice lost its silken edge. The honeyed words were gone, replaced by a roar of pure, cosmic rage that shook the very foundations of the mountains. Then you will be unmade. The roiling void beneath the archway surged upwards. It was no longer just a pool of blackness. It was taking physical form. Tendrils of living shadow, darker than any night, lashed out, clawing at the air, ripping at the failing runes on the stone. It's breaking through, Kael roared over the din. The seal won't hold. The first alphas used their life force, I shouted back, the truth of what we had to do settling over me with chilling certainty. We have to do the same. We have to reignite the runes. There was no more time for plans. We moved as one, pressing our free hands against the cold, ancient stone of the archway. He placed his on a faded sunburst rune, and I placed mine on a corresponding rune shaped like a six-pointed snowflake. We poured everything we were into the stone. His fire, a torrent of molten gold, surged into the arch. My ice, a river of pure, crystalline cold, flowed beside it. The runes began to glow, the sunburst blazing with a new fierce light, the snowflake shimmering with a cold blue fire. Our life forces, our very souls, were the fuel. The strain was unimaginable. I felt my energy draining away, the world turning gray at the edges of my vision. Through our linked hands, I felt Kael's own strength faltering, his fire burning not like a sun, but like a candle in a hurricane. The Blightfall shrieked, a sound that tore at our sanity. The tendrils of shadow stopped clawing at the runes and turned their full, malevolent attention on us. They surged forward, a tidal wave of uncreation, an abyss of absolute nothingness that was about to swallow us whole. We were trapped, our hands pressed to the stone, our life force draining away, with no way to defend ourselves from the wave of oblivion that was now just seconds away. Chapter 14. The wave of oblivion surged toward us. There was no sound, only a profound, soul-crushing pressure as the void came to unmake us. Our life forces were draining into the stone, the runes glowing brighter with every drop of our ebbing strength. But it wasn't fast enough. We were fuel being burned to delay an inevitable end, trapped between the ancient seal and the insatiable hunger of the Blightfall. Through our linked hands, I felt Kael's desperation, a fiery, frantic roar against the dying of the light. I felt my own terror, a final, silent plea in the face of the endless cold. We were going to die. We had come all this way only to be erased. Then, a new thought, a command, blazed across our bond. It came not from my mind or his, but from the space between us, from the very heart of our fated link. We are not two halves, we are one whole. Kael's head snapped toward me, his amber eyes wide with a wild, desperate understanding. The same impossible idea was dawning in my own mind. We weren't meant to just power the seal. We were the seal. Elara! His voice was a raw, urgent command, not through the air but directly in my soul. Don't push it out. Pull it in. Pull me in. It was madness. Everything in me, every instinct for self-preservation, screamed to keep my power as a shield. To let his fire in completely felt like suicide, a willing surrender to annihilation. Trust me. His thought was a blazing comet in the darkness of my fear. Trust us. The tendrils of the void were just feet away, close enough that I could feel the life draining from my skin. I had no other choice. I closed my eyes and let go. I stopped fighting his fire and invited it into the core of my being. He, in turn, stopped resisting my ice and drew it into his own soul. The pain was a supernova. It was the agony of being simultaneously frozen solid and burned to ash. My very atoms felt like they were being ripped apart and reformed. My sense of self, the I that was Elara, dissolved into a torrent of glacial cold. Through our bond, I felt the I that was Kael dissolve into a raging inferno. We were erased, but we were not destroyed. In the void of our sacrificed identities, something new was born. A light exploded from our joined hands, a light of impossible balance. It was not gold or blue, but a shimmering, ethereal silver, the color of twilight and dawn combined. It erupted outwards, slamming into the charging Blightfall, and the void, for the first time, recoiled. The light coalesced, drawing our two fading forms into its heart. We were no longer Kael and Elara. We were a single, unified consciousness in a body that was not our own. Where we had stood, a new creature rose. It was a wolf of impossible size, larger than any alpha, its form seemingly woven from the very fabric of the twilight. Its fur was the color of a star-dusted night sky, shimmering with motes of both golden fire that burned without heat and silver frost that shone without cold. Its eyes were not amber or blue, but a swirling, mesmerizing vortex of both, holding the wisdom of summer and the silence of winter. This was the equinox wolf, the living embodiment of the seal. The Blightfall halted its assault, its form wavering as if in confusion and fear. It was a creature of absolute negation, and it had just met its opposite, a creature of perfect, unassailable balance. The equinox wolf lifted its head, and from its throat came a sound that was neither a growl nor a howl. It was a chord, a perfect, resonant harmony that vibrated through the deadlands, shaking the petrified trees and rattling the ancient stones. It was the sound of life itself, in all its fire and frost, and it was a weapon the Blightfall could not withstand. The void shrieked, the sound of a billion dying stars. The wolf took a single, deliberate step forward, and the ground beneath its paws did not freeze or burn. It bloomed. For a brief, miraculous moment. Faint, ghostly flowers of pure energy blossomed on the dead rock before fading. With a primal grace that was both Kael's strength and my own stillness, the wolf lunged. It didn't claw or bite. It plunged directly into the heart of the roiling shadow, its body a beacon of silver light in the absolute darkness. The void dissolved around it, unable to unmake something that was a perfect, self-sustaining whole. The wolf's silent, harmonic howl intensified, pushing, driving, and corralling the shrieking consciousness of the Blightfall. It forced the entity back, away from the world, and through the now blazing archway of the seal. The moment the last tendril of shadow was pushed through, the runes on the archway flared with a final, blinding light. The gate slammed shut. The voice in our minds was silenced. The oppressive weight on the world lifted. The equinox wolf stood alone before the sealed archway, its form beginning to waver, its purpose fulfilled. The brilliant silver light that composed its body faded, dissolving like mist in the morning sun. And on the cold, hard ground, where the great wolf had stood, Kael and I lay collapsed, unconscious and separate once more, our hands having fallen apart. The battle was won. The seal was restored. And the world was utterly, profoundly silent. Chapter 15. Awareness returned not as a rush, but as a slow, gentle tide lapping at the shores of a vast, silent emptiness. My first sensation was the cold of the stone beneath my cheek. It was a familiar feeling. But something was different. It was just cold. It wasn't the agonizing, soul-deep chill of the deadlands, nor the sharp defensive frost of my own power. It was simply the world. I opened my eyes. The bruised purple sky was still there, but the malevolent pressure was gone. The air was clean, thin, and utterly still. Before me, the great archway stood, its runes glowing with a steady silver-white light, the perfect fusion of fire and ice. The seal was whole. A memory, overwhelming and profound, washed over me, the feeling of Kael's fire not as an opposite but as a complement, the dissolution of my own identity into something larger, something perfectly balanced and whole. The silent, harmonic song of the equinox wolf. I wasn't just Elara anymore. A piece of Kael's fire now lived in the heart of my winter, and a piece of my ice was forever banked in the embers of his soul. Panic, sharp and sudden, pierced the strange tranquility. Kael. I pushed myself up, my body screaming in protest. Every muscle felt like it had been shredded and then inexpertly respun. I was weaker than I had ever been in my life. A few feet away, he lay unmoving, his face pale beneath its tan, his black hair stark against the gray rock. I crawled to him, my movements clumsy and slow. Kael? My voice was a dry, broken whisper. I reached out, my hand trembling, and pressed my fingers against his neck, searching for a pulse. His skin, which had always felt like a furnace against mine, was now just warm. A natural, living warmth that didn't scorch me. Beneath it, a slow, steady pulse beat against my fingertips. He was alive. Relief so profound it felt like a physical blow washed through me. As my hand rested on his skin, I glanced down at our marks. The stark black ember on my hand and the brilliant white frost on his were gone. In their place, on both of our hands, was the same new mark. A swirling, intricate spiral of silver gray, like smoke and mist entwined. The symbol of equilibrium. At my touch, Kael let out a low groan, his eyelids fluttering open. His amber eyes, cloudy with exhaustion, found mine. He didn't look at me with command or suspicion. He looked at me as if he were seeing a reflection of his own soul. Elara, he breathed, the name a statement of fact, a recognition. We were. One, I finished for him, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. He slowly pushed himself into a sitting position, his movements as pained and stiff as my own. We sat there, facing each other in the silent heart of the now cleansed deadlands, the weight of what we had become settling between us. The Alpha and the Exile were gone, erased in the light of the equinox wolf. All that was left was Kael and Elara. I felt it, he said, his voice raw. Your life. The loneliness. I didn't just see it. I lived it. And I lived yours, I whispered back. The weight of the prophecy. The fear of failing your father. Of failing everyone. There was nothing left to hide. He had seen the scared, unloved child cowering inside the Frost-Blight. I had seen the vulnerable wolf struggling beneath the Alpha's mantle. In that moment of absolute fusion, our deepest truths had been laid bare. He lifted his hand, the new silver mark swirling in the twilight. I'm not burning you. It was a statement of pure wonder. You're not freezing me either, I replied, a watery, impossible smile touching my lips. He reached out, his movements slow, deliberate. He gently brushed a stray lock of my silver-white hair from my face. His touch was warm, solid, and for the first time it didn't hurt. It was a comfort, a miracle. Tears I didn't know I had left to cry welled in my eyes and traced paths down my dusty cheeks. He didn't wipe them away. He simply watched them fall, his own eyes shining with a raw, unguarded emotion that mirrored my own. The intimate, fragile moment was broken by a practical, life-threatening reality. We were stranded. Our horses were gone, likely fled or taken by the Blight. Our supplies were meager, and we were weeks from any known civilization, drained of the very power that had been our greatest weapon. We need to get out of here, he said, his voice regaining a sliver of its command. But it was softer now, inclusive. It wasn't an order. It was a statement of shared purpose. He tried to stand, but his legs buckled. I reached out instinctively, and he leaned on me, our combined strength barely enough to get him upright. Then he did the same for me, his arm a solid, warm support around my waist as I staggered to my feet. We stood there for a long moment, leaning on each other, two pillars of a ruined temple. We were broken, exhausted, and more vulnerable than we had ever been. And yet, for the first time, we were not alone. He looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. I nodded, and together we took the first, faltering step away from the sealed archway and onto the long, uncertain path that led back to the world of the living. A path we would have to walk together, or not at all. Chapter 16. Every step was a negotiation between will and weakness. The Deadlands, cleansed of the Blight's active malevolence, were now just a vast, silent graveyard of a world. The bruised purple sky had softened to a gentle, perpetual twilight, and the wind no longer whispered threats, but simply sighed over the barren rock. We walked for hours, leaning on each other, a slow, stumbling procession of two. The profound, magical exhaustion was a physical ache, a leaden weight in our bones that made every movement a monumental effort. We found one of our horses, a tough, resilient mare, huddled in the lee of a rock formation, having miraculously survived the chaos. The other was gone. We loaded what was left of our supplies onto her back and continued on foot, the horse a fellow survivor on our desperate trek south. As dusk deepened, a new kind of cold set in, the simple, honest cold of a northern night. We found shelter in a shallow cave, its entrance mercifully shielded from the wind. Kael, moving with the stiff, ingrained motions of a lifetime of duty, began to prepare a fire. He pulled out a flint and steel, but his hands, drained of their supernatural heat and trembling with fatigue, fumbled with the simple tools. A spark refused to catch in the dry tinder. He let out a low, frustrated growl, the sound more weary than angry, and slammed the flint down. "Useless," he muttered, staring at his hands as if they belonged to a stranger. He, the alpha of the Sunstone, the wolf of summer's fire, could not even perform the most basic act of survival. I moved to his side and knelt in the small fire pit he'd prepared. I didn't say a word. I simply took the flint and steel from his unresisting fingers. My own hands were steady. My lifelong affinity with the cold had taught me a deep, abiding patience. On the third strike, a tiny spark caught. I gently blew on the ember, nurturing it, shielding it, until a small, determined flame flickered to life. The fire grew, casting a warm, golden light on the cave walls, pushing back the encroaching dark. We sat in its glow, the silence stretching between us, thick with unspoken things. He was watching me, his amber eyes reflecting the firelight. The alpha's mask was completely gone now, leaving him raw and unguarded. "I never learned to do that," he admitted, his voice a low murmur. "I never had to. The fire was always just there." "And I never felt a need for it," I replied, holding my hands out to the flames. The warmth was no longer a torment. It was a comfort, a welcome sensation against my skin. The cold was always enough. We were two halves of a whole, so defined by our extremes that we had never learned the simple truths of the middle ground. "Elara," he said, and the way he spoke my name was different. It wasn't the name of a curse or a weapon. It was just my name. "When we were one, I saw your whole life. Not just the pain, the strength it took to endure it, the quiet courage." "And I saw yours?" I whispered back. "I saw the boy who inherited a war he never started, trying to be the alpha his father demanded, the savior his pack needed. I never saw the wolf who was just Kael." The name felt strange and intimate on my tongue. I had only ever thought of him as the Sunstone Alpha. He looked at me, a flicker of surprise and something else, something softer in his eyes. "No one has called me that in a long time," he said quietly. That night, we didn't sleep on opposite sides of the fire. The cave was small, and the cold was deep. We laid our bedrolls close, a practical necessity that felt like a profound statement. We lay in the flickering firelight, not touching, but close enough to feel the quiet rhythm of each other's breathing. As I drifted off, I didn't fall into the lonely, empty dreams of my past. Instead, my consciousness slipped into a shared space, a gentle echo of our time as the equinox wolf. It wasn't a vision or a battle, but a memory of a feeling, of perfect balance, of a silent, harmonic peace where fire and ice were not at war, but in a graceful, eternal dance. I felt his strength bolstering my weariness, and he felt my stillness soothing his restless duty. It was a dream of absolute belonging. I woke in the deep of the night to a subtle shift. Sometime in our shared dream, he had moved. He was now lying on his side, facing me, just an arm's length away. One of his hands rested on the ground between us, his palm open and upturned in a gesture of unconscious offering. My heart gave a slow, steady beat. The girl who had flinched from every touch, who had seen connection as a threat, was gone. I reached out, my fingers tracing the new silver spiral on the back of his hand, before gently, tentatively, linking my fingers with his. He didn't wake, but a soft sigh escaped his lips, and his hand closed around mine, a warm, solid anchor in the quiet dark. We had faced the void and survived. But this This simple, trusting touch in the middle of a dead world felt like the true victory. And I knew, as I drifted back into our shared, peaceful dream, that the journey home would not be an end, but a beginning. Chapter 17, I woke to the soft gray light of the Deadlands dawn. For a moment I was disoriented. The memory of the shared dream, of balance and belonging, so vivid it felt more real than the hard rock beneath me. Then I became aware of the warmth. It was a solid, steady presence beside me, and it was radiating from the hand that was still clasped firmly in mine. Kael was already awake, lying on his side, watching me. There was no guard in his amber eyes, no calculation. There was only a quiet, contemplative stillness. He didn't pull his hand away. A faint flush, a sensation I hadn't felt in years, warmed my cheeks. In the face of his open, honest gaze, my own ingrained defensiveness felt like a distant memory. "Good morning," I whispered, the words feeling both ridiculously normal and profoundly significant. A small smile touched his lips. "Good morning," he replied, his voice a low, rough murmur. He squeezed my hand gently before finally letting go, and the loss of contact was a palpable absence. "We need to find food. Our rations won't last another day." He pushed himself up, his movements still stiff with a deep, bone-weary ache I knew was mirrored in my own body. He grabbed the dagger at his belt, the familiar weight a small comfort. But as he took a step, he swayed, his hand going to the wall of the cave to steady himself. The great Sunstone Alpha, who could command armies and face down cosmic horrors, was weakened to the point of collapse. "You're in no condition to hunt," I said, my voice soft but firm. His jaw tightened, a familiar flicker of alpha pride warring with the undeniable truth. "It is my duty to provide." "Our duty is to survive," I interrupted, standing to face him. I picked up my own dagger, its cold, solid weight feeling more familiar than ever. "I've been hunting to survive my whole life. Alone, let me do this." He looked at me, at the newfound confidence in my stance, and the fight went out of his eyes. He had lived my solitude in the vision. He knew the truth of my words. He gave a slow, reluctant nod. "I will come with you. I can still track." It was a compromise, an admission that he needed my strength as much as I needed his. The hunt was a silent, intricate dance. The land was not entirely dead. Here and there, hardy, pale grasses grew in sheltered crevasses, and we found the tracks of a herd of shaggy mountain grazers. Kael, despite his weakness, was an expert tracker, pointing out a broken twig here, a scuffed stone there, with an economy of motion I had to admire. But it was I who led the stalk. My life of solitude, of moving like a ghost on the edges of the world, had made me preternaturally silent. I moved through the rocks like a drifting shadow, my steps making no sound, my presence a whisper on the wind. Kael followed, his own considerable skill hampered by his exhaustion, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something akin to awe in his gaze as he watched me work. We cornered a large, horned beast in a narrow ravine. It was powerful, its hooves sharp as flint, its eyes wild. A month ago, Kael would have met its charge head-on, a battle of pure, overwhelming force. Now that would be suicide. "You will draw its attention," I murmured, our heads close together behind a rocky outcrop. "From the left, just for a moment. I will take it from the right." He didn't question me. He didn't alter the plan. He simply met my eyes and said, "On your signal." I gave a sharp, bird-like whistle. He burst from cover, a flash of movement that drew the beast's furious attention. It bellowed and charged him. As its head went down, its flank exposed, I moved. I was a blur of gray and silver, my dagger held in a low, precise grip. I didn't aim for a killing blow, but for the tendons in its rear leg. My strike was swift and sure. The beast screamed and stumbled, its charge broken. That was all the opening Kael needed. He was on it in an instant, his own blade finding its mark with a final, merciful precision. It was over in seconds. A perfect, coordinated attack that relied not on overwhelming power, but on strategy, timing, and absolute trust. We stood over our kill, our breaths misting in the cold air. He looked from the fallen beast to me, and the respect in his eyes was as bright and clear as any flame. "Your pack was a fool to waste such a hunter," he said, his voice raw. "They were afraid," I replied, the words holding no bitterness, only a simple, sad truth. "It's hard to see past the monster." "I'm not afraid," he said, and his gaze was so intense it felt more intimate than any touch. "And all I see is you." That evening, as we sat by the fire, the aroma of roasting meat filling our small cave, the last of the barriers between us crumbled into ash. We ate in a comfortable silence, the shared meal a sacrament that sealed our new bond. We were no longer two fated halves of a prophecy. We were a pack of two, forged in the heart of the Deadlands, ready to face the long walk back to a world that would never understand what we had become. And for the first time, the thought of facing that world didn't fill me with dread. Because this time, I wouldn't be facing it alone. Chapter 18. The days that followed fell into a quiet, steady rhythm. We were a pack of two, moving through the gray twilight of the Deadlands with a shared, unspoken purpose. We hunted together, our movements a seamless blend of his strength and my stealth. We took turns keeping watch, the trust between us so absolute that sleep came easily for the first time in either of our lives. He talked of his pack, not of their strength or their glory, but of the weight of their hopes, the faces of the children, the fears of the elders. I, in turn, spoke of my solitude, not of the pain, but of the small, quiet things that had kept me sane. The way the frost patterned the river ice, the silent wisdom in a hawk's gaze, the one tattered book of myths my mother had left me. We were mapping the territories of each other's souls, filling in the blank spaces the visions had left behind. Slowly the land began to change. The petrified dust gave way to hardy, windswept tundra. We saw the first signs of resilient life. A snow hare darting between rocks, a flock of hardy birds circling a distant peak. And then one morning, as we crested a high, windswept ridge, we saw it. Below us, stretching to the horizon, was the living world. A vast, dark ocean of green, the great northern forests. And in the east, a faint line of pale gold heralded a phenomenon we had not seen in weeks. The dawn. We stopped, the single horse standing patiently behind us. We stood on the precipice between the land of the dead and the land of the living. The journey was almost over, and a new, unspoken tension began to build between us. Here, in this empty world, we were just Elara and Kael. Down there, he was the Sunstone Alpha, and I was... What was I? The hero? The monster? The cursed exile he had dragged home? Kael turned to face me, his expression serious, the impending sunrise painting the edges of his dark hair with gold. "When we go down there," he said, his voice low and steady, "everything will change. My pack will see a hero, but they will also see the Frost-Blight who dimmed their beacon. They will be grateful, but they will be afraid. And Seraphina, she will see a rival." "I know," I whispered, my heart growing cold with a familiar dread. Our fragile peace was about to be shattered by the politics and fears of a world I had never truly been a part of. "They will expect me to honor you," he continued, his amber eyes fixed on mine, intense and unwavering, "to reward you. They will suggest lands, titles, a place of honor as a warrior of the pack. It will not be enough." "Kael, you don't owe me anything." "I owe you everything," he cut in, his voice raw with an emotion that stole my breath. "My life, my pack's future, my sanity." He took a step closer, closing the small space between us. But this is not about a debt. It has not been about a debt for a long time. He reached out, not to my hand, but to my face, his thumb gently tracing the line of my jaw. His touch was warm, real, and sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with the cold. "I saw your soul, Elara," he murmured, "and you saw mine. We are no longer two halves of a prophecy. We are two halves of a whole. I cannot rule without you. I will not." The words I had never dared to dream, the future I had never allowed myself to want, was being laid at my feet, and it was terrifying. "They will never accept me," I said, the old fears rising like ghosts. "As your Luna? An exile? A curse?" "You are not a curse," he said, his voice a fierce, protective growl. "You are my heart, my balance. You are the winter to my summer, and without you I am just a wildfire destined to burn out. They will learn to see you as I see you. I will make them." He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. We stood there, breathing the same cold, clean air, our worlds shrinking to this single, profound point of contact. The first rays of the true sun broke over the distant mountains, bathing us in a soft, golden light. "I am choosing you," he whispered, his breath warm against my lips. "Not because of a prophecy, not because of a debt, but because my life began on the path back from the Deadlands, walking by your side." And then he kissed me. It was not a kiss of fire and passion, not an alpha's claiming. It was a kiss of quiet reverence, a soft, searching pressure of his lips on mine. It was a kiss that tasted of a long, hard journey and a future that was both terrifying and beautiful. It was a promise. I leaned into him, my hands coming up to rest on his chest, and for the first time, I didn't just accept the warmth. I welcomed it. I returned his kiss, pouring all the hope of a girl who had only ever known winter into this first, breathtaking taste of the sun. When we finally broke apart, the world was bathed in the light of the new day. We looked down at the vast, living forest below, at the path that would lead us back to his home, to our home. The fight was not over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But now we would face it together. As one. Chapter 19. The kiss was a sunrise, a promise of a new day. But as we descended from the ridge, the warmth of that promise was met with the harsh, complicated reality of the world below. The silence of the Deadlands was replaced by the rustle of living leaves, the scent of damp earth, and the distant call of birds. For me, these were the sounds of a world I was about to face, not as a ghost, but as a wolf with a name, a purpose, and a partner. It was a terrifying, exhilarating thought. We walked for 2 days, our pace steady, our shared strength a quiet, constant presence. We no longer needed to lean on each other physically, but the invisible support was always there. We spoke little, conserving our energy. But every shared glance, every time he passed me the water skin, was a conversation in itself. We were relearning how to exist, not just as individuals, but as a unit. On the 3rd day, the air began to warm, carrying the familiar scent of sulfur and hot stone. We were entering the Sunstone territory. The first patrol found us near the steaming river that marked the border. 2 large warriors, their faces grim and battle-ready, burst from the trees, their weapons drawn. Their eyes widened in shock as they recognized their alpha, a man they had likely given up for dead. Relief warred with utter confusion on their faces. Then they saw me. The relief vanished, replaced by a cold, hostile suspicion. Their hands tightened on their weapons. They looked from me to Kael, their expressions a mixture of fear and accusation. "Alpha," the lead warrior said, his voice a low, cautious rumble. "You are alive." "I am," Kael replied, his voice calm and resonant with an authority that had been absent in the Deadlands. He dismounted, placing himself between the patrol and me. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't need to. And this is Elara of the Winter's Heart, the hero who saved the seal and with it our world. She is with me. She is under my protection. The title, Winter's Heart, was a deliberate choice. He was already rewriting my story, replacing Frost-Blight with a name of power and purpose. The warriors were taken aback, their gazes flickering between the new silver mark on Kael's hand and the identical one on mine. They didn't understand, but they understood the command in their alpha's voice. They lowered their weapons, their hostility banked, but not extinguished. One of them was dispatched to ride ahead, to announce the alpha's impossible return. As we walked the final leagues to the settlement, I could feel the news spreading ahead of us like a wildfire. The entire pack was waiting. They filled the entrance to the mountain city, a silent, tense sea of sunstone wolves. They stood on the stone balconies, in the archways, their fiery eyes fixed on us as we approached. The hostility was a physical force, a wave of heat and hatred that washed over me. But this time I wasn't alone in it. Kael's hand found the small of my back, a warm, solid, and very public statement of support. He led me through the parting crowd, his head held high. I focused on the feeling of his touch, using it as an anchor, and met the hundreds of burning stares with a calm, steady gaze I had learned in the face of the void. In the front rank stood Ganon, his old face a mask of disbelief and profound relief. And beside him, radiating a cold fury that was a stark contrast to the heat of her pack, was Seraphina. Her eyes, when they met mine, were not just hateful. They were murderous. "My alpha," Ganon breathed, stepping forward and bowing low. We had feared the worst." "The worst has been averted, Ganon," Kael said, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. "The Blightfall is contained. The seal is restored, thanks to the courage and power of the wolf who stands beside me." He was forcing them to acknowledge me, to see me not as a monster but as their savior. A murmur of confusion and disbelief rippled through the crowd. Seraphina stepped forward, her every movement a picture of graceful, venomous pride. "We are all relieved to see you returned, Alpha Kael," she said, her voice like honey laced with poison. "But you will forgive our confusion. You returned from the land of the dead with the very creature we feared would be your end, claiming she is our savior. You bear her mark." She pointed a delicate, accusing finger at the silver spiral on his hand. "How do we know this isn't some trick? How do we know you are not the one who is cursed now, your mind enchanted, your will no longer your own?" The accusation was brilliant in its cruelty. It planted a seed of doubt not about me, but about him. It gave the pack a reason to question their own alpha, to fear the very man they were meant to follow. The crowd stirred, the murmurs growing louder, uglier. I felt Kael's entire body tense, the protective alpha ready to roar and crush this challenge with pure force. But I knew that would be a mistake. It would make him look like a tyrant, confirming Seraphina's insinuation that he was no longer himself. Before he could speak, I took a single step forward, out from behind his protective shield. I met Seraphina's gaze directly. "You speak of curses, Lady Seraphina," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying with a strange, new resonance in the sudden hush. It was the voice of the equinox wolf, calm and balanced. "I have lived with one my entire life. I know its weight, and I know its absence." I held up my hand, displaying the silver mark. "This is not a curse. This is the symbol of the balance that saved you. A balance your alpha was brave enough to seek and strong enough to forge." I looked from her face to the sea of hostile wolves. "You are afraid. I understand. But you should ask yourselves, what is more dangerous? A power you do not understand, or a fear that would have you turn on the very wolves who just saved your world?" The challenge was laid bare. A stunned silence fell over the pack. I had not cowered. I had not hidden. I had stood and spoken a truth they could not deny. Kael looked down at me, and in his eyes I saw a blazing, unrestrained pride. He placed his hand on my shoulder, a gesture of unwavering solidarity. Seraphina's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She had expected a monster or a victim. She had not expected a queen. "Words are easy," she spat, her composure cracking. "Proof is all that matters. I challenge her. Trial by combat. Let the ancestors judge her worth." Chapter 20. A collective gasp went through the pack. A trial by combat was an ancient, sacred rite, a final and brutal arbiter of truth. To challenge a wolf under the Alpha's direct protection was a breath away from treason, but to refuse such a challenge was a sign of weakness or guilt. Seraphina had trapped them perfectly. Kael's face was a thundercloud. His hand, which had been resting on my shoulder, became a talon of pure, possessive fury. The air around him shimmered with heat as his alpha presence flared, a silent, deadly promise of retribution. "You forget yourself, Seraphina," he snarled, his voice a low, guttural rumble that made the very stones vibrate. "You stand in my city and challenge my word. You challenge the hero of the seal. There will be no trial. There will only be your exile for this insubordination." He was about to cast her out, to end it with a show of absolute power. But even as the pack recoiled from his fury, I knew it was the wrong move. It would make me look like a liability he had to protect, a weakness he had to hide. It would prove Seraphina's point. I placed my hand on his arm. The gesture was quiet, but it was enough. He stopped, his furious gaze snapping down to me. Through the skin of his arm, through the silver mark that bound us, I sent a single, clear thought. "Trust me. This is my fight." He stared at me, a storm of conflict in his eyes. He had just fought a cosmic entity to protect me, and now I was asking him to step aside and let me face his most dangerous warrior. It went against every instinct he possessed as an alpha, as a male, as my partner. But then he saw the look in my eyes, not fear, but a calm, unshakable resolve he had helped forge in the heart of the Deadlands. He had seen me face the void. He knew the steel I now possessed. With a barely perceptible nod, he stepped back. The oppressive wave of his alpha presence receded, and the choice was left to me. I turned my full attention to Seraphina, whose face was a mask of triumphant glee. She believed she had won, that she had driven a wedge between us. "I accept your challenge," I said, my voice clear and steady, carrying to every corner of the silent gathering. The pack gasped again, this time in pure shock. Seraphina's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She had expected a refusal, a political battle. She had not expected this. "The trial will be held at dawn," Gannon announced, his voice heavy, stepping into his role as arbiter. "In the training ring, the fight is to submission. The ancestors will be the judge." That night, the Alpha's lodge was a cage of tense silence. Kael paced before the hearth like a caged lion, the firelight casting his shadow long and menacing on the walls. "She is the best fighter in my pack," he said, not looking at me. "She was trained from the time she could walk. She is fast, ruthless, and she will not be fighting for submission. She will be fighting to kill." "I know," I said quietly. I was not cleaning a dagger or preparing for a physical brawl. I was sitting on the furs near the fire, my eyes closed, my breathing slow and even. I was reaching inward, not for the wild, lashing power I had unleashed in the Deadlands, but for the quiet, harmonic balance at my core. I was listening to the echo of the equinox wolf. He stopped his pacing and knelt before me, his hands taking mine. His were warm, his concern a palpable force. You can't meet her strength with strength. You must. I won't, I interrupted softly, opening my eyes to meet his. I am not going to fight her like a warrior, Kael. I am going to fight her like a force of nature. I squeezed his hands. She thinks my power is a storm, a blizzard she can weather. She doesn't understand. It's not a storm. It's the coming of winter. He saw the certainty in my eyes, and his own restless energy finally calmed. He nodded, his faith in me overriding his fear for me. Show them, he whispered, his voice thick with pride. Show them all who you are. Dawn broke, cold and clear. The entire Sunstone Pack was gathered around the circular, sand-filled training ring. The air was thick with anticipation. Seraphina was already there, a vision of deadly grace. She was dressed in light, supple leather armor, 2 wickedly curved blades strapped to her back. She stretched, her movements fluid and confident, playing to the crowd. She was the champion, the embodiment of Sunstone fire. Then, I entered from the opposite side. I wore a simple, dark tunic. My only weapon was the single dagger Kael had given me, but I held it loosely at my side. I was not a warrior preparing for a fight. I was an arbiter arriving to pass judgment. A wave of murmurs went through the crowd. I looked so small, so unprepared against their champion. I met Seraphina's eyes across the sand. Her lips curled into a contemptuous sneer. The ancestors gave you a chance to run, Frost-Blight, she called out, her voice dripping with scorn. They will not be so merciful a second time. Ganon stood on a raised platform. The trial begins on my mark, he bellowed. He raised his hand, held it for a tense, silent moment, and then let it fall. Begin! Seraphina exploded into motion. She was a blur, a streak of copper and steel, closing the distance between us in a heartbeat. She didn't feint or test my defenses. She went straight for the kill, her blades a silver whirlwind aimed at my throat. I didn't move. I didn't dodge. I didn't raise my dagger. I simply stood my ground, my eyes locked on hers, and I let the winter come. Chapter 21. Seraphina's blades were a silver arc of death, just inches from my throat. The collective breath of the Sunstone Pack was a held, silent prayer for my end. Kael's hands were clenched into white-knuckled fists at his side, his entire being a taut line of restrained violence. I did not move. I did not flinch. I simply let go. A wave of profound, absolute cold radiated from me. It was not an attack. It was a statement of being. The air in the ring thickened, growing heavy and crystalline. A collective shiver went through the crowd as the temperature plummeted. Seraphina's charge, which had been as fast as a striking viper, faltered. Her momentum slowed as if she were suddenly running through deep, invisible water. The silver blades, once gleaming with deadly intent, were instantly coated in a thick, feathery layer of frost, their killing edges blunted by the impossible cold. She grunted, shocked, pushing through the unnatural resistance with sheer force of will. Her inner fire, the very essence of a Sunstone wolf, raged against my winter. She managed to complete her strike, but it was a clumsy, stumbling blow, robbed of all its speed and grace. The tip of her blade, meant for my heart, scraped across my arm, leaving a shallow, stinging line. Blood, dark and startlingly warm, welled from the cut. It did not drip. It froze, a single perfect crimson bead on my skin. The pack gasped. She had drawn first blood, but it was a hollow victory. I hadn't even moved to defend myself. I looked from the frozen drop of blood on my arm to Seraphina's furious, confused face. Then I lifted my hand. The sand at her feet, which had already begun to harden with frost, came alive. Tendrils of black ice, solid and swift as snakes, shot up, wrapping around her ankles, trying to root her to the spot. With a roar of fury, she stomped her feet, her warrior's strength shattering the icy shackles. She leaped back, putting distance between us, her blades held in a defensive posture now. She circled me, her eyes narrowed, her initial contempt replaced by a wary, predatory caution. She was no longer fighting an unprepared exile. She was fighting the arena itself. "Is this all you have, monster?" she snarled, trying to taunt me, to force me into a mistake. "Hiding behind your cold?" I did not answer with words. I took a single, deliberate step forward onto the sand. Where my boot fell, the frost deepened, spreading outwards in a complex, beautiful lacework pattern. I took another step, and then another. With each step, my domain grew. A light, ethereal snow, impossible in the geothermal heat of the Sunstone territory, began to fall, swirling gently within the confines of the training ring. The pack was silent, their animosity forgotten, replaced by a profound, terrified awe. This was not the chaotic, lashing power of a curse. This was the controlled, inexorable, and beautiful advance of a changing season. Kael watched, his face unreadable, but I could feel his pride through our bond, a steady, burning flame that gave me strength. Seraphina saw her opportunity slipping away. She saw the pack's allegiance wavering as they witnessed a power beyond their comprehension. With a final, desperate battle cry, she charged, not with skill this time, but with pure, untamed rage, her inner fire blazing in a visible, shimmering aura around her. This time I met her charge. I raised my hand, palm open, not in a gesture of attack, but of command. The two frosted blades were ripped from Seraphina's grasp by tendrils of wind and ice. They flew through the air and embedded themselves, hilt deep, in the sand at the edge of the ring, perfectly still. At the same time, the ground before her erupted. Not with spikes, not with chains, but with a smooth, clear wall of ice that shot up with impossible speed. It was not a barrier. It was a prison. It rose and curved, encasing her completely in a perfect, flawless crystal dome. She crashed into the transparent wall, her momentum spent. She was trapped, unharmed, her face a mask of utter shock and disbelief. She pounded her fists against the ice, but it was as solid and unyielding as a mountain. I took another step forward, and a single, sharp spear of ice grew from the ground inside her prison, its tip coming to rest a hair's breadth from her throat. It was a final, silent statement. The trial was over. I stood in the center of my winter, the snow swirling gently around me, the small cut on my arm, the only evidence that a fight had even occurred. I had not thrown a punch. I had not used my dagger. I had won by being exactly who I was. Absolute silence descended upon the Sunstone Pack. They stared from the imprisoned, defeated champion to me, the calm, still queen of my own silent winter. The Frost-Blight was dead. In her place stood a power they had never imagined. I turned and met Kael's gaze across the sand. The pride in his eyes was a blazing inferno, a fire so bright it could warm the entire world. He took a single step forward, a clear, public acknowledgement. This wasn't just a victory in a trial. This was the arrival of their Luna. Chapter 22. The silence in the training ring was absolute, broken only by the soft, impossible sound of falling snow. Seraphina, on her knees inside her crystal prison, stared at the spear of ice before her throat, her face a canvas of shattered pride and utter defeat. The pack was a gallery of stunned statues, their faces turned from their fallen champion to the quiet, unassuming wolf who had commanded a season. I held the moment, letting the truth of what they had witnessed settle into their bones. I was not a curse. I was not a monster. I was a power they had never understood, and it was a power that now belonged to them. Then with a slow, deliberate breath, I lowered my hand. the ice spear dissolved into a fine, glittering mist. The crystal dome that had imprisoned Seraphina did not shatter. It sublimated, turning from solid to vapor in a silent, swirling cloud, leaving her kneeling and exposed in the center of the ring. The ethereal snow that had filled the air ceased to fall. It was an act of mercy, an act of control. I had won, and I would not mar that victory with cruelty. Seraphina trembled, whether from the lingering cold or pure, unadulterated rage, I did not know. She stared at me, her eyes burning with a hatred that would never fade. But she was broken. The pack had seen her defeated not by a monster, but by a queen. Then a single set of footsteps crunched on the frosted sand. Kael walked into the ring. He moved into the heart of my winter, and the profound cold did not touch him. He was a creature of fire, and this was his balance. He stopped beside me, not in front of me, not behind me, but at my side. He did not look at the defeated Seraphina. He looked only at me, and the pride in his amber eyes was a sun that could melt any glacier. He turned to his pack. His voice was not the roar of an alpha chastising his people, but the steady, resonant voice of a king introducing a new age. "You have witnessed a trial," he declared, "but you have seen more than a victory. You have seen the truth of the prophecy. Our fire is a wild, consuming thing without the focus of winter. Our heat is a weakness without the strength of cold. For generations, we have been a pack out of balance." He placed his hand on the small of my back, a simple, solid gesture of unwavering unity. Elara of the Winter's Heart has not just saved us from the blight. She has saved us from ourselves. She is not a curse to be feared. She is the balance we have been praying for. He finally turned his gaze to Seraphina, and his eyes were as hard and cold as any ice I could create. "You challenged not just a hero, but the will of the ancestors and the heart of your alpha. Your fire has been proven to be nothing more than reckless, selfish heat. You are no longer welcome here. You will gather your things and be gone by midday. You are exiled." Seraphina stared at him, a final, desperate plea in her eyes, but she found no mercy there. With a strangled sob of fury and humiliation, she scrambled to her feet and fled the ring, her departure a final, pathetic end to her ambitions. Kael addressed his pack once more, his voice softening, becoming the voice of a leader guiding his family. "The trial is over. The judgment is past. Now a new day begins." He took my hand, lifting it for all to see, the silver spirals on our skin seeming to glow in the morning light. "I have found the other half of my soul. I have found the heart of this pack. I present to you Elara, my mate, my partner, and your Luna." For a long, silent moment, the pack was still. Then Ganon, the old, scarred warrior, took a single step forward. His tired eyes, which had once looked at me with fear and contempt, now held a deep, profound respect. He went down on one knee, his head bowed. It was a drop of water that started a flood. One by one, then in dozens, the Sunstone wolves knelt in the sand. A sea of proud, fiery warriors, elders, mothers, and children, all bowing not in fear, but in absolute soul-deep allegiance to the new, balanced power that stood before them. To their Luna. Tears streamed down my face, but for the first time in my life, they were not tears of sorrow or loneliness. They were tears of belonging. Kael squeezed my hand, his thumb gently wiping a tear from my cheek. He leaned in, his voice a whisper meant only for me, though the whole world could see the truth of it in his eyes. "Welcome home, my love." And as I looked out at the sea of bowing heads, at the pack that was now our pack, I knew he was right. I had walked through the land of the dead, faced the void, and endured a trial of fire. But my journey had not been about finding power or proving my worth. It had been about finding the path back to a home I never knew I had, at the side of the wolf who was my other half. The Frost-Blight was a ghost, a distant memory. I was Elara, Luna of the Sunstone, and the winter in my heart had finally, truly, found its sun.